So this is something that I want to talk about. Somebody asked me this question on Instagram. Is there a way to stop myself from developing all of my parents' toxic traits? And I want to talk about this because this is something like I have probably spent more effort on this than literally anything else in my life. And I will explain why. The reason I think this is so important is because the older I get, the more I realize how much of our behavior is basically exactly what he's talking about, is like repeating mistakes that we learned from our parents, or repeating unhealthy behavior that we learned from our parents. And nobody really tells you specifically how to break out of it. And for me, I realize how much my mom kind of fucked me up, basically. I'm pregnant at the moment, and this is one of the things I worry about a lot. Yeah, I worry about it a lot too, because, you know, for anybody who doesn't know, I just had a son 2 weeks ago. And you know, from the moment we found out that my wife was pregnant, you know, this is something that I kicked this into high gear. I guess I've talked about this before, but my mom was a pretty fucked up person, and I inherited a lot of fucked up things from her. So the reason why she was fucked up, you know, when I was a kid, I just kind of was like mad at her because she was a very unstable person, like very emotionally unstable. She would kind of just like lose her shit and get angry and stuff all the time and start crying. You know, I'd say something like, you know, I don't like Brussels sprouts. And then she'd start crying and get mad at me and say like, oh, I worked so hard to cook this dinner and you don't like Brussels sprouts. I tried so hard to be a good mom to you and you don't appreciate any of it. You know, I'm a failure and, you know, just blah, 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 blah. And she would like melt down. And I'm like, what the fuck, Mom? Jesus Christ, I just said that I don't like Brussels sprouts. And so when I was younger, I was just sort of angry at her for that. And as I've gotten older, I realized why she was like that. That's some rough emotional abuse, you know, maybe, but I understand why she was like that now. Because her mom died of cancer when she was 7. And then her dad basically drank himself to death when she was like 14. Died of like, I don't know what it was, like cirrhosis of the liver or something like that. So both her parents died by the time she was, you know, in like 9th grade. And then her and her sisters and her brother got adopted. And her brother killed himself when he was 21. I think she was a year or two older. And she found him hanging from a tree. And then she became a prostitute and got raped. And so by the time that she was, 23, think of all that like horrible trauma she had been through. All before she was even like 25 years old. Of course she was a fucking mess. She had me when she was 33, I think. Maybe 31, I don't remember. But at that time, she was like an full-on alcoholic. I don't know my father. She just decided that it would be a good idea for her to have a kid on her own. And at that point, she had already been married twice. She was married 4 times in her life. She was married twice before I was even born. Never married my father. The person I call my dad is my stepdad. Well, I have 2 stepdads. He was her 3rd marriage, and then they got divorced. And she married this other guy that she was with until she died. She died like, I think 7 years ago or something like that, of like a brain hemorrhage. And one thing I knew when I was a kid, I always swore that I wouldn't be like her and their friends. You know, her and her friends were all like hippie drug addicts that were, you know, had like this string of failed relationships, and they were all losers that kind of never got their shit together. Just really like dysfunctional, fucked up people. And I always swore that I wasn't going to be like that. You know, I never got into drugs or anything like that when I was a kid. Like in high school, I was straight edge. I never did any of that kind of stuff. But then I got to be, you know, in my 30s, and, you know, I had some relationships that went wrong, and really just sort of like, I don't know, just kind of like lost control, to be honest. And I started drinking a lot and doing drugs and shit like that. And then I realized, you know, there was one point when I was like 32 or 33, when I was like, oh my God, I've become my mom. I swore that I wasn't going to be this person, but here I am, 33 years old with a string of failed relationships. I'm drinking 6 or 7 days a week. I'm doing drugs all the time. I've been sober maybe 3 days out of the past year. Oh my God, I've become my mom. And that was like terrifying because, you know, we know where this path leads. And my mom died when she was 69, and I don't think she was happy in her entire life. And that was a really scary moment to look in the mirror and realize, you know, that I had sort of become my mom, even though I swore I wouldn't. And now here I am, I'm 44 years old now. And since then, since that moment where I kind of looked in the mirror and was like, oh my God, the person I've become is disgusting. And at the time I had like no money. I mean, I was like dead broke. I had a bunch of like student loan debt. Since then, I have paid off all my student loans. I've bought and sold 2 houses. Got married. I've been with my wife for 10 years and we've never once had a fight ever. Like, we don't raise our voices at each other, anything like that. We get along just as well today as we did the first day we were together. And we just had our son 2 weeks ago. And, maybe it took me a little bit longer to get my shit together than I would have liked to, but I did get my shit together. I don't have all the answers by any means. I'm just one person, whatever, take my opinion for what it's worth. But I wanted to share sort of how I think about this, because maybe it'll help someone else. Like, if you have that kind of moment of like, oh shit, I'm kind of headed down a path that I don't want to be going down, here's my suggestion on how to do it. So number one, the first thing to do is to identify what I like to call the invisible scripts. Like, what invisible scripts are you following? Meaning that an invisible script is something that you subconsciously believe, or some pattern of behavior that you don't realize you're following because it's just something you were programmed with from a young age and you didn't realize it. For example, I learned from my mom at a young age because, she was married 4 times and every one of her marriages obviously was miserable. I thought that relationships should be hard, and I thought fighting was normal. Like, I thought it was normal for people to be like, to yell and scream at each other. Like, I remember one time when I was maybe like 5 or 6 years old or something like that, my dad was watching a football game. She asked him something and he didn't hear. And she got like furious and took like a container of sour cream and threw it at the TV, and like, I don't know. I was like, I guess everyone does that, right? Like, that's normal. This is what it's like to be in a relationship. That's what I thought. That was the invisible script to me, is that, relationships were chaotic and it's normal to have that level of like emotional instability. And it's not fucking normal. That's not normal. But that's the invisible script that I had. Another invisible script that I realized I was programmed with is running away from your problems with drugs and alcohol. And again, even though I was straight edge in high school and I said I was never going to do drugs and I was never going to drink or anything like that, guess what? I did. I ended up doing it. I didn't start drinking or doing drugs till I was like 29. I was with this girl for like 7 or 8, 9 years, something like that. Yeah, maybe like 8 or 9 years. And she dumped me for good reason. I didn't do anything like super shitty. I was just like kind of a bad boyfriend. It sucked. And I'm not at all upset with her about this. I'm glad she did. Like, it helped me grow. And she was definitely better off without me. So I'm glad she did it. And it was totally right. But it was very hard. That was a hard thing for me. And that's when I started, I did the same thing as my mom did, is drinking and partying and hanging out with other people who are drinking and partying, as a way to like escape from this emotional pain. And at first I was like, oh, I'm just going to go out and have a couple drinks with my friends. It's not that big of a deal. And then one thing leads to another, and you're doing that, 5, 6, 7 days a week. And then someone's like, oh, we're going to go get some Coke. Do you want to try it? And I'm like, all right, why not? And then next thing you know, I don't know, like probably like the lowest point of my life, I was like with a friend of mine at like 7 a.m. on a Sunday. We had been like doing Coke the whole night since like 7 or 8 the night before. We'd been doing Coke for like 12 hours straight. We had like a rock the size of a golf ball, and I had done so much Coke that it didn't even work on me anymore. I could do like a giant line and it didn't even get me high anymore because my receptors were just like clogged. And I was like, all right, well, I guess I can't do any more Coke because this shit doesn't even work on me anymore. Another big invisible script that people have is the idea that the world is out to get me. That authority figures are all bad and people are trying to screw me. Like, how many times have you heard like a hardcore song be like, this one goes out to all the people that said I was never going to be anything? Well, did anybody ever actually tell you that? Like, did any teacher ever be like, you know what, Finn, you're never going to amount to anything. You're a piece of shit. No, they never said that. In fact, if anything, they were probably trying to help you, but you wouldn't listen because you had this invisible script in your head that the world is out to get you and that all authority figures are bad. We all have these own invisible scripts. So step one is to identify what these invisible scripts are. What things do you believe unconsciously? Dysfunctional, negative things do you believe? What patterns of dysfunctional behavior are you following unconsciously? And where do those come from? Like if you notice yourself, for example, like fucking up relationships again and again and again, why? Why are these relationships failing? So you got to identify these invisible scripts, and you have to be really honest with yourself about that. It's really hard. And like, I would suggest actually writing them down. Like write it down on a piece of paper, because as soon as you write it down on a piece of paper, you will instantly know that it's not true. If the invisible script in your head that's causing you to do all of these like dysfunctional things is, I'm a piece of shit that's not worth anything and I'm never going to amount to anything because I was born to lose. As soon as you write that down on a piece of paper, you'll be like, well, that's not true. It's one of these things that's an interesting thing about life, is that if you say something out loud or write it down, then it just like instantly sort of becomes revealed to be false. So do that. And then once you have identified that invisible script, every time you find yourself following that invisible script, stop. And that's easier said than done, but like literally tell yourself stop. Like even just say it out loud. I'm like a huge believer in saying things out loud, because as soon as you get it out of your head, there's so many things. Yeah, writing it down, repeat it out loud, or type it into a text-to-speech app. And when you hear it, write it and say it. You'll reflect on it from different perspectives. Exactly. It's just a different thing. These things that in your head seem so like powerful and persuasive, when they become documented, you see them for what they are, which is bullshit. They are invisible scripts. And then you just stop. Stop it. Once you know what this pattern is, stop it no matter what. For example, for me, I had to like really reboot my life. I realized that one of the reasons I was doing all this shit, you know, partying with all these people and just acting like a fucking idiot, is because I was afraid to be alone. Like I was afraid to just be alone on a Saturday night. It was terrifying to me, which it sounds weird to say that, but it was. But I realized that if I kept going on the way that I was going, I was going to end up dead or in prison or fucking who knows. But I realized I have to stop, because I was getting worse and worse and worse by the day. And so I said, you know what? I'm just going to white knuckle this. I am no longer going to hang out with these people. I am no longer going to do this stuff. And if that means that I am alone on every Saturday night for the rest of my life, so be it. Because the options here are either just completely go down the drain or like make a conscious change. I know what I have to do. And you may need to make some big choices, some big changes that aren't comfortable. It could mean like that you don't hang out with any of your old friends. It could mean that you have to, you know, move or completely change your career. You might have to do a lot of stuff that's not comfortable or easy, but you have to do it. You have no choice, and you know it. We all know what's right. You know, if you talk to like really severe addicts and alcoholics, or like gang members, or anybody that's kind of living a really like dysfunctional life, all of them know what's right. Okay. We all know the difference between right and wrong. In our heart, you know it. And I don't mean right and wrong in like a moral sense. I just mean like the right thing and the wrong thing for you. We all know it inside. All you have to do, and this is easier said than done, is you have two voices. You know, it's like the old cartoons. There's the two voices on your shoulder. There's the angel and the devil. You just have to listen to the angel, because it is telling. And I don't mean this in a religious sense. I just mean that we all have that voice in our head that knows the right path. All you have to do is consistently take that right path, one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 minute at a time. All these little choices will add up to change in your life. So like for me, I moved because when I lived in Cincinnati, everybody that I knew was a fuck up basically. And a lot of them were really nice people. Like that's not a judgment, but I just knew that if I continued hanging out with these people, it was going to end badly. Just like my parents. I knew if I continue doing what I'm doing, I'm going to be exactly like my mom, and I'm not willing to do that. So I didn't even sell everything I had. I just fucking left everything I had in a fucking basement of the apartment building I lived in, and I moved, got a new job in Columbus, and I restarted my life. And then in Columbus, I continued making the same fucking mistakes. Even though I rebooted my life, I continued fucking up. I had to reboot my life again. 10 years ago, I moved from Columbus to Seattle. Again, I left everything that I had Like when I moved here 10 years ago, everything I had fit in like 5 cardboard boxes, like U-Haul boxes. I put it in the back of my car and I drove here. That's everything I had. And I was 34 years old. Okay. Like I was an adult, a grown ass adult. And that's all I had to my name. But I knew that I had to do it or I was going to fucking die. As simple as that. I had to. And it sucked. It was hard. Like, and I had to live. I'd paid like $500 a month to live in a room in a house with like 5 other people, and I felt like a fucking complete loser being like 34 years old living like that, but that's what I had to do. You know, you have to be willing to make big painful changes. You know, it's literally life and death, you know? It's literally life and death sometimes. So what it comes down to is like, think about the person that you want to be and do what that person would do, okay? I know that might sound kind of like corny or simplistic, but if you think like, who is the person that I want to be and what would that person do in this situation? Do that. Just do that. You know what's right in your heart. You know what's right. So do that. And the last thing that I think is incredibly important, and this takes daily conscious effort for most of us. Okay. This is not something that you're just going to figure out in a day or a week or a month. I still have to work on this all the time. Like I think about, you know, so our son is 2 weeks old. I don't want him to ever see me being angry. And I know that I'm going to fuck up. I'm not perfect, but I don't want him to ever see me angry, because for a kid to see your parents angry is scary. When kids feel like things aren't stable, that's when it kind of goes off the rails, right? Like if a kid doesn't feel like they're safe at home, that's when they start like lashing out and doing just wild shit. You know, I used to reckless drive a lot too, because I had a lot of that I don't care what happens to me attitude. I've totaled 2 cars from him. One of them rolled twice and somehow survived with barely a mark on me. Well, you know, that's the thing, is you're playing Russian roulette every time you do that. And you know this, obviously, that's like, you know this, but you know, I'm just so glad that all those times I was like hanging out with the wrong kind of people. I could have very easily ended up in some kind of fucked up situation. And it's really just pure luck that I didn't end up getting pulled over at the wrong time with the wrong person and end up in some horrible situation. The last thing I would say is surround yourself with healthy people. This is very important. And that could mean maybe you're not going to go to shows anymore. Maybe you're not going to hang out with your old friends anymore. Maybe you're going to have to make new friends that are people that you didn't ever think you would be friends with. Okay. But you have to surround yourself with healthy people, because, you know, there's that old saying of like, you were the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. It is 100% fact. It is a fact. When I moved back here to Seattle, the people I spent most of the time with, or spent the most time with, is my wife's family. And my wife's family is awesome. They're all really healthy, happy, successful, normal people. I remember I went to their family Christmas the first year I was back here. And, you know, when I think about Christmas when I was a kid, it always involved my mom like screaming and crying and being mad at us. And like, you know, there'd be some sort of a meltdown, right? My mom would scream and get upset and cry and have a scene and accuse someone of not loving her, or just some bullshit. So to me, Christmas is just like, okay, let's wait until mom has a fucking meltdown and we all sit here for an hour looking at our shoes while she screams at us. Like, that's what I think of Christmas. Then I went to Christmas with my wife's family, and there was none of that. Nobody was fighting. Like, everyone was getting along. The kids were opening presents. We had a great, nobody was drinking. Like, it was just like, oh, this is like Christmas in an ABC Family movie, but it's real. And, you know, for the first time in my life, I had like a template for what a healthy, happy Christmas could be. And I was like, oh, not every family has some like fucked up skeletons in the closet. It is possible to just be happy and healthy and normal. And that's why it's so important to surround yourself with the right people. Because if you're surrounding yourself with the wrong people, it's only a matter of time until they're like negative behavior and thinking rubs off on you. It can't be avoided. You know, you will be impacted by the people you're around. People often make the mistake of thinking that the only people who will understand you are people in the scene that you're part of, but that's just false. There are plenty of balanced people out there who know what you're going through. 100%. Sounds obvious, but you have to commit to accepting yourself as you change. For us metalheads, that means okay with becoming more of a normie. Otherwise, you're going to sabotage your efforts to make yourself happier. Yes, you may become a boring normie. And guess what? Ask yourself this. Who is happier? The people at metal shows or the normies that you went to high school with that now are, married with 2 kids in the suburbs, working some boring fucking job? I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? Like, and nobody gets into metal because things were great at home when they were a kid. So this question of like how to break the cycle of generational trauma and having fucked up parents that programmed you with negative dysfunctional things is something that I have spent and continue to spend a tremendous amount of time on. And the number one thing is you got to be able to identify those invisible scripts and then stop yourself from following them. That's what it comes down to. So I hope that helps somebody out there in some way or another. But yeah, I'm glad somebody asked me that question because as you can tell, this is something I've thought about quite a lot. And yeah, I hope it helps somebody somewhere. And just remember, you can do this. No matter how bad things have gotten for you, no matter how bad they have gotten, there is somebody that has been through worse, that has pulled through it, and now has a perfectly happy, amazing life. Okay, so there's nothing that has happened to you that you can't overcome. No matter what has happened to you, you can overcome it.